You've won, Jamie. The kingdom is yours.
Stone. Their only option
is to sacrifice the ranch.
There's not much we can do. The whole world is watching.
There's not much you can do about it. You leave Jamie to me.
Let me start from the beginning, because the very first shot of this trailer already tells you everything about the tone of this show. It's 1969. The land is still there. The mountains are still there. The ranch is still there. But everything feels different. Heavier. Like the weight of every Dutton who ever lived and died on that land is just sitting on top of it, pressing down. And that's exactly what this show is supposed to feel like, because by 1969, the Dutton family has been through more than most families could ever survive. They crossed the country in covered wagons. They fought off outlaws, corrupt politicians, land grabbers, and their own grief. They buried children, spouses, brothers, and dreams. And yet, the land is still theirs. At least, for now. And that right there is the emotional core of everything we're about to watch. Now, the trailer opens with what looks like a wide shot of the ranch at dawn. And I need you to pay attention to that because Sheridan always uses the land as a character. It breathes, it watches, it remembers. And in 1969, that land has seen almost a century of Dutton blood soaked into it. So when you see it in that golden morning light, it's not just a pretty shot. It's a reminder of everything that came before. Every sacrifice, every fight, every loss. The land remembers even when the people forget. And that's a theme that runs through every single one of these shows. Then we get our first look at the characters. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because the faces we're seeing are both familiar and new at the same time. We're in a strange in-between generation now. The original pioneers are gone. James and Margaret Dutton. Elsa, they're long gone. Jacob and Cara Dutton, gone. And even Spencer, who carried the story through 1923, is now an old man at this point, living somewhere in the shadow of a love he never got over. We're now looking at their children and grandchildren. And that gap, that space between those who built something and those who inherited it, is exactly where 1969 is going to live. That tension between legacy and identity is going to drive every single storyline in the show, and the trailer is already making that clear from the very first frame. What really caught my attention, though, is the way the men in this trailer carry themselves. There's this quiet, controlled anger in all of them. Like they're holding something back. Like they've been told their whole lives to be strong, to protect the land, to carry the Dutton name with dignity. And they're doing it, but it's costing them something. You can see it in the jaw, you can see it in the eyes, and that's very different from what we saw in 1883, where the emotion was raw and on the surface. James Dutton cried. Elsa felt everything out loud. But these men in 1969, they've been trained by generations of grief to keep it inside, and that makes them more dangerous, more unpredictable, and honestly, more interesting to watch. And then there's the women. Because Sheridan has always written incredible women in this universe, and from what we can see in the trailer, 1969 is not going to be any different. There's a woman in one of the shots who just has this presence, this quiet authority, that reminds me so much of Cara Dutton. That same energy of someone who has seen everything fall apart and chose to hold it together anyway. Not because someone asked her to, but because she decided to. And if my theory is right about Elizabeth's storyline and where her character ends up, then this woman might be exactly who I think she is. Someone who was shaped by tragedy into something unbreakable. And watching that kind of woman navigate 1969 America with everything that was happening in that era, the civil rights movement, Vietnam, the counterculture, all of that colliding with the very traditional, very isolated world of a Montana ranch, that is a story worth telling. The trailer also gives us these quick cuts of what looks like conflict, not just within the family, but outside of it too. There are people coming for the ranch again. Of course there are. There are always people coming for the ranch. That's the one constant in every Dutton story. The land attracts enemies the way it attracts loyalty. And in 1969, the threats are going to look different from what we've seen before. It's not going to be outlaws on horseback. It's going to be lawyers, politicians, developers. People in suits who are scarier than any man with a gun because they use systems instead of bullets. And watching the Duttons fight that kind of enemy, with their horses and their pride and their stubbornness, is going to be both painful and thrilling at the same time. Now let's talk about Spencer, because honestly, Spencer Dutton might be one of the most tragic characters in this entire universe, and that's saying a lot considering what this family has been through. We knew from the end of 1923 that Spencer never remarried. He took the comfort of a widow, had a son with her, and that was it. No grand love story, no second chance at happiness, just a man who loved one woman so completely that nobody else could ever come close. And then we find out he died in 1969, on Alex's grave. Think about that for a second. This man carried that love with him for decades, through wars, through loss, through raising a child that wasn't born from the woman he loved. And at the very end, the only place he wanted to be was next to her. That is not just a detail. That is a statement about who Spencer Dutton was at his core. A man defined entirely by a love that the world took from him too soon. And that's exactly why his presence in 1969 is going to hit differently than anything we've seen before, because we're not watching a young Spencer full of fire and adventure like we did in 1923. We're watching an old man, a man who has spent his entire life grieving. And there's something incredibly powerful about watching that version of a character. The version that survived everything. The version that made it to the end but paid a price so heavy you can see it in every line on his face. Now here's what I think is going to happen with Spencer in 1969 and why it matters so much for the overall story. By this point, Spencer's son with the widow would be in his mid to late 20s. And we don't know much about this son yet. We don't know his name. We don't know what he looks like. We don't know if he inherited his father's quiet intensity or his mother's practicality, but what we do know is that Spencer was not exactly in the best place emotionally to raise a child. He was a grieving man who made a practical decision with a widow out of loneliness and survival instinct, not out of love. And that kind of upbringing leaves marks. Growing up with a father who loved a ghost more than he loved the living, that shapes a person in ways that aren't always visible on the surface, but always come out eventually. And I think 1969 is going to explore exactly that. The complicated relationship between Spencer and his son. The resentment that probably built up over years of feeling like you were never quite enough for your own father. The desperate need to prove yourself to a man who was already somewhere else in his mind. But here's the twist that I keep coming back to. What if Spencer, despite everything, despite his grief and his distance, and his emotional unavailability, what if he ends up being the one who truly connects with the next generation? Not his own son necessarily, but Elizabeth's kids. Because think about it, Spencer always had this ability to connect with people who were broken. Alex was broken when he met her. He was broken himself, and that shared brokenness was the foundation of everything they had. So maybe, just maybe, in 1969, Spencer finds that same kind of connection with Elizabeth's grandchildren. The man who taught young John Dutton III how to look at the land and understand what it's saying. The man who told him the old stories. The man who showed him that being a Dutton means carrying pain without letting it crush you, and that would be so perfectly Sheridan. Because he loves these full-circle moments. He loves showing you that the things you thought were weaknesses in a character were actually the things that made them most valuable to the people around them. Spencer's grief, which seemed like it would destroy him, might be the very thing that makes him the perfect mentor for a 10-year-old boy trying to figure out who he is and what this land means to him. Kevin Costner's John always had this deep, almost spiritual connection to the ranch. He always talked about it like it was alive, like it had a soul. And someone had to teach him that. Someone had to show him how to see it that way. And I think that someone was Spencer. Old, broken, still grieving Spencer, sitting on a porch somewhere watching the sun go down over the mountains and telling a little boy about the people who came before him and why every single one of them decided the land was worth dying for. The trailer gives us a glimpse of what I believe is Spencer in his final years, and the weight of it is just sitting on your chest the whole time you're watching. There's this stillness to him that feels different from the stillness of strength. It feels more like the stillness of someone who has already made peace with how the story ends. And that quiet acceptance, that sense of a man who knows his time is almost up and is okay with it because he's finally going home to the woman he never stopped loving, that is going to be one of the most emotional threads in this entire show. I already know I'm not going to be ready for it when it actually happens on screen. And honestly, I don't think any of us are. Okay, so now we need to talk about Elizabeth.